Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no copay. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, this is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice because we can't pay our bills with that, but we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you. Oh my goodness, September is upon us. Kids, sorry, you're going to have to go back to school pretty soon if you haven't already. And hopefully some of these great episodes will help keep you going, keep you motivated. But, we have the holidays coming up around the corner. They're going to be here before we think about it. So again, I want to thank my sponsors, Keto Mojo, keto-mojo.com. Great website, great people. They're doing great work in the community. They're doing a ton with education. So if you're looking for a ketone monitor or glucose monitor, they're a great resource. And check out their website. It's amazing. They have so much information, so much good stuff for us to all learn from. Also, of course, health code, gethealth.com, GETHLTH.com. Discount code MetHealth through this podcast and for metabolic health. They still have great chocolate and vanilla shakes and vegetarian offerings for those so inclined. But they're doing great work, and they also have a new berberine that a lot of people are raving about that has turmeric in it. So it's right up, what we're looking for our patients for improving metabolic health. So again, thank you for your sponsorship and for bringing these episodes, and thank you for listening. Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. Today I have one of the smart kids here. This guy, man, I mean, seriously, in medicine, there's always kind of, we hear things about each other and you kind of hear these backstories. But Dr. Adrian Soto-Mota, he is like everyone loves this guy. And they go, his science is right on. I know he's worked with Tro, unfortunately, and not me, but Dave Feldman, you've been doing so much work. So Doc, welcome, man. So great to have you.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I mean, I'm very happy to be here, and you make me think of something my grandmother used to say. I quote my grandmother a lot. She was full of like wisdom nuggets. But something she used to say is that if not even Christ pleased everyone, what can you expect of me? So, and I mean. I think that I've been lucky in getting recent and different collaborations. Part of that is because I ended up specializing in something that's needed but seldomly encountered in biomedical science, which is like expertise with statistical methods. And that's why if you look at the papers I've worked in, they are a bit of everything. I mean, there are papers from dermatology, there are papers from infectology, there are papers, and of course it doesn't mean, I am an expert in all those fields. I mean, of course I can explain thoroughly what each paper is about and how I worked in it, but what I am trying to say is that I ended up specializing in, well, you could say nothing. Think of an ophthalmologist, for example. Eye doctors super specialized in the eye, sometimes in a particular tiny region of the eye, the retina or the cornea, and they are, that's their field. And or nephrologists end up specializing in a particular type of care, dialysis, for example, or transplants. And I ended up working on specializing in a really general field, which is internal medicine. And after that, I ended up specializing in another general field, which is metabolism. And I ended up specializing in statistical methods, which are used in many different fields. So I ended up being someone who can, be nosy in very different research questions. And that's something I enjoy. I mean, I am someone who gets bored, like easily if they look the same for a long time. And I actually have more collaborations non-related to low carb than related to low carb. I mean, most people who identify me by name are within the low carb community, but yeah, my only field of research. It's my favorite one. I mean, I won't be shy about it, but I think it keeps me sane, not spending all my life in the endless debate, in the diet wars.
Yeah, and what you do is so great. I mean, statistics, it was for me, like I had to take it to get through undergrad. And I'll do it at a different college. And where I was at, it was on the semester, on the quarter system, the other one semester. So I took a whole semester over the summer of statistics, and I was like, oh my gosh, I had to get through this. And then I'm like, so happy I'm done. And then I get back to at UC Irvine, and they say, well, one semester is a little less than 2 quarters, right? Type thing. So they go, you need 3 more weeks of statistics. So I had to retake it again at the college again. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I still don't understand it, right? But but the amazing thing is what you do is if you understand statistics and you understand the methodology, you can look at any paper and go, this doesn't add up. This doesn't look right, right? So you have this anywhere you could call the BS card, and guys like me just really, I would read a study and just go, okay. And most doctors, that's the case. They look and they go, well, this is what this study says. Well, that's not what it's saying actually. When you look at like they left this huge thing out, and and what you've had the ability is to go back and look at these studies and go, yeah, there's a problem here. And it's easy. I think it's almost impossible to do a perfect study, like a study that you're not
It
going to
is
get
impossible.
criticized.
It is effectively impossible.
Yeah, because life's not like I've talked about. We've talked about some of the research who study mice, and their whole basis of obesity is based on mice. Like, how many mice do you know that get divorced or go through stressful times, or go to Pizza Hut when wherever they go and grab pizza and cake and stuff? Like, that's not just they just don't have, except in New York City where they have access to that stuff, and then things change, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And something I would say is that it is because now we have the capacity, as a community, as a human community, because now we have the capacity of produce so much data on very different topics, and we have an expanded capacity for storing and analyzing data. It became a sort of, specialization bucket data analysis. I mean, and you could say, for example, statistics or classical statisticians have this, slight contempt or disregard for the term data science, because they say it's just statistics, and it just became, like popular, or machine learning. Some people would say that machine learning is really just statistics, and they're right, absolutely. AI is perhaps just, statistics with more computer power. And I think that it is fair to say that if you dive deep enough into any field, you will end up intertwined in controversies. I mean, statisticians are far from having every concept, like clearly defined with consensus. And they have their own controversies about also some very basic things. So the same way we have diet wars that are the statistics wars, And there are like two big groups or two big schools where they think they are completely incompatible. There are people in the middle who say we can take the best out of everyone. And I think this will be true for any field, any knowledge field. I think that part of the problems that make debates go, bad is when people spend all their time in controversy, or the statistics wars, the diet wars, the lipid wars, the calorie wars. So it is when that becomes your entire routine and set of problems that people start, people become not the most polite, not the
Well,
most
yeah.
polite
Well, Adrian,
debater.
it's like religion. Like if I want to know about your religion,
Yeah.
someone wants to know about your religion, and they're open-minded to hear what you have to say. But if they're just wanting to argue with you for hours, like that's what it has become. Like some people say it's calories in, calories out. Some people say it's hormonal. Maybe we meet in the middle somewhere, maybe. But if no one budges and no one says, "Well, we got to look at both things. Let's try to open our minds and see, can I listen to you and say you seem like a reasonable guy?" The argument. So I've had people that I thought were nuts, and then I talked to them and go, "Oh, it does it makes sense now." On the surface, it sounded like a crazy idea, like the lean mass hyper responder stuff, right? On the surface, a lot of people are like, if your LDL's 500, you're going to die, right? Yeah, it's just, we just know that. Then you say, well, let's look at the data and see what it says.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's very important to don't associate your identity with a position in a controversy. I mean, it's because that's when you start losing the capacity for telling the difference between someone arguing against your position or someone fighting you. I mean, a lot of people think that if someone is not agreeing with me and they say something against my belief, some people take that as a personal attack. And it's not necessarily it's a personal attack. I mean, I can disagree with someone, and that doesn't mean, I mean them harm or not at all. However, when people attach too much their identity with a given position in any debate, they start losing that ground on, are they attacking me or are they attacking an idea I have? And I think that's because I was born in a family where there are, like, you could say academic, but yeah, philosophical discussions all the time. From very early, I was raised with this idea on, I can disagree with you and still love you. I can think you are completely wrong about something without necessarily,
And that's probably the wisdom of your,
harming.
that's the wisdom of your grandma being passed down. I feel the same way. There's people I disagree on with nutrition. I disagree with you, but I love you and we agree on this. We agree on this,
Yeah.
and we find a way, and I think probably let's go back, like, before we get too caught up in the weeds. Tell people who you were, where you grew up, where you are now, and like what got you to this, like what in your mind happened with going into this low carb realm and looking into this lipid stuff. Like what happened as a young age? Did you always want to be a doctor?
From very early, I mean, I wanted to. I think that the first time I thought of becoming a doctor, I think I was like 7 or 8. And in the beginning, I wanted to be a psychiatrist. That's what I thought. More than medicine, I was very interested in, like, you could say people's behavior or mental illnesses, because my one of my branches in my family tree has had. I mean, I have lots of relatives who have lived with mental disorders. So one of the first forms of uh, clinicians I was exposed to were psychiatrists, and I saw them, as a force of good, and as they were very useful for helping people and for helping people in my family. So that's what I thought when I was a kid. I wanted to go to med school for. Then, when I was already in med school, well, you could say that before that. For a time, I considered doing math instead, because my father is a mathematician. And I mean, I sometimes say that I kind of disappointed both my parents by getting into med school, because my father wanted, he would have been more comfortable, I guess, if I had gone into math, because he could have, like, I don't know, recommended books or professors, or he would have been able to be closer, or to feel helpful during my college years. And my mom, she's a philosopher. And when I started saying, yeah, maybe I want to do medicine, I don't think they said, like, yeah, I mean, that perhaps will pass. But when it was for real, they were both like, yeah, really, medicine? I am the only medical doctor in my family. So,
Me too.
yeah,
Me too.
that puts you in a weird position. But anyway, I mean, the point is that since I didn't know if I was going to get, well, you could say it's equivalent of a scholarship to go to med school or not. And I always like numbers, because my dad made a great job at making my brother and I like numbers in general. I thought, well, maybe if I don't get a scholarship, if I don't get into med school, I'll do math. And that was my plan B, so to speak. And I ended up in med school. And during the early med school years, I loved physiology. I was absolutely in love with physiology. And I think that swayed me in the beginning to, okay, maybe I want to do psychiatry. I will do neurology. And I wanted to do neurology for a long time. I mean, my CV, my med school CV screams, this guy wants to do vascular neurology. And I entered internal medicine. I mean, after med school, when I chose internal medicine to then become a neurologist. And during my second of the internal medicine program, which is 4 years in Mexico, one of my mentors approached me, because I always liked physiology, and I always liked biochemistry, really. One of my mentors approached me and asked me if I had considered to do research in biochem/nutrition physiology path rather than neurology. And I considered it. And when he approached me, the first thing that I realized is how ignorant I was about nutrition in general. Like, I realized that by then, I mean, by that point, I already had almost a decade of medical education. And I hadn't received, more than 2 hours of education on nutrition. And I was, I had to recognize that I was, just following, like the trend on, low fat makes more sense because fats have more calories per gram. And
And you're going to block the
and
arteries. And if you got 2
exactly.
hours, you got 2 hours more than most doctors out there on
Oh,
nutrition.
yeah, for sure. So at the same time, I was like, okay, the same way as an internal medicine resident, the same way I like going to the source, and I like to go and read the study where this idea came from. I want to go to the source of low fat is better, calories explain, weight change. Like, that's where I started. And I realized it was so wrong and broken.
You had your own personal struggles with weight and
Oh,
health
for
also too,
sure.
right?
That's also parallel. I mean, as Mexico has a huge problem of childhood obesity. We have been world champions for many years in childhood obesity. And I was an overweight kid. I lost my excess weight early after puberty, mostly by playing tennis. I love playing tennis. I don't get to do it as much as I would like, as much as I liked, but
Are you doing pickleball now that you're getting a little older or not?
no, no,
You're
no,
not,
no, no,
you're
no.
a purist, man. All right. Some people are
Yes,
cheering right now.
I am highly conservative about racket sports, and um, I realized that when I lost weight without knowing exactly how I did it. I would, drink a liter of Gatorade after playing tennis, thinking I was doing just fine. I drank lots and lots of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is a big thing in Mexico, like a big, big, big thing in Mexico. And
And hence the
I was,
childhood obesity. And that's where,
yeah, yeah,
I've done a lot of volunteering in Guatemala, El Salvador, Vietnam, and the little villages where they have soda. It's a total disaster. It's incredible. It's incredible.
absolutely. I mean, I used to have,
But
uh,
you still lost weight doing that. You still lost weight doing that.
yes, 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 yes. And I mean, I was very young. I was, enjoying the physiology advantages of being a teenager, and that helped for sure, despite my wrong ideas about weight physiology. But I mean, to go back when I was, considering the idea of doing following an academic path in nutrition research, I realized how little I knew. And then I realized how little the field knew. Because in one thing is to realize you're ignorant. And then a different thing is to realize that, the frontier of knowledge still has huge holes and huge gaps of knowledge. So if you arrive, for example, at, I don't know, let me see, infectology. If you want to become an infectious disease doctor, I mean, I'm not saying there aren't controversies among infectologists. They have their own, but you have lots of tools. You have lots of information. You can measure if a bug is resistant or not. You can measure, which antibiotic is the best for your community and your local epidemiology, and it's easier to know what to do. You have more tools to know what to do and to measure if you're doing it right or wrong. In nutrition, you don't get that. I realized that the field had more gaps, more knowledge gaps. So I guess that as any other human being, I like feeling useful. And I like feeling, the feeling of I solved the problem. And I realized that I was going to become an independent researcher earlier if I became focused on nutrition physiology than on vascular neurology. And yeah, that's part of why made me change paths. A very concrete point or moment during those weeks considering changing my life plan was realizing that calories in, calories out is an equation frequently interpreted as a formula. And something in algebra or something in math notation is very frequent. I mean, an equal sign sometimes is understood or interpreted as computation, uh, think of a formula in physics, for example, or formula in chemistry. What you're getting is a statement on how to get something, how to get a new substance, or how to compute speed, or how to compute power. Equations are just equality statements, are just a statement about two things being equal. It's not necessarily this causes this. Equations are both-sided. However, formulas and equations look very similar. For example, in computer science, you typically assign a arrow sign for certain types of statements, for computations, and equal signs for equality statements. So I realized that many in the field were confusing the first law of thermodynamics of there is no new energy, you only transform energy, and calories in, calories out, which is an equation, with a formula, with saying calories in, calories out is the cause behind weight change. And realizing there was a generalized confusion at such a basic level for that field made me think those years, yeah, there's something definitely I can contribute here. Because at the same time, doing research in vascular neurology, at least in Mexico, is harder. So I thought I can have fun and I can have a positive influence in the field earlier. At the same, also, if I become, nutrition physiologist rather than neurologist.
Yeah, and the other amazing thing, and I didn't really know this till I got to sit down and talk to you in San Diego, was that you're a clinician. You're doing clinical research too. You're out there seeing patients and seeing what happens. I think most researchers, they do research. They're not dealing with patients. And what you said at the beginning really hit me, because you're talking about, philosophy, and you're talking about psychiatry, and like that's what we do. Like, how much of what we do is mental, right? Like, if they don't trust you, whatever pill you give them is not going to work, or whatever advice you give them. Like, how do you instill that? And if you're working with mice and that's all you do, and you go, okay, you just do this and that, like it makes sense, right? Obviously, if you say I'm going to give this mouse 300, whatever, I don't know how many calories mice eat, but 300 calories to this mouse, 700 calories to this mouse. Look, the 187 pounds gets fat, so that must be the problem, right? And it's there's so much more to that. There's so much more. And why is it that they're eating so much? Why is it that, like, we don't see horses getting fat out in the wild, or other animals in the wild? They just don't get obese. And is it they figured out the equation, or is it that that's just naturally what they do?
Well, one of the I mean, you made me remember one of the things that also during those years made me realize there was a huge problem, was reading how method in mice a mice nutrition method was developed, which was the cafeteria diet. And the cafeteria diet, I mean, you cannot come up with a mice and tell the mice, I am doing a PhD, please move less and eat more. So all animal experimental models in the early decades of the field involved burning or eliminating the satiating nuclei inside mice brain. I mean, but I mean, just out of common sense, that's a terrible experimental model, because you have tons of humans who are perfectly capable of overeating without brain surgery. So the first time someone managed to convince an animal to move less and eat more was by feeding them ultra-processed foods. So I think that was also an insightful moment. And I think that all diseases, especially chronic diseases, non-contagious diseases, will end up being highly influentiated by mental health. And they are this vicious cycle of cause and consequence, of my mental health is suboptimal because I am feeding myself awful foods, and because I am eating more of these awful foods because my mental health is struggling. So I think that all fields of clinical medicine end up being, partly mental health related.
Yeah, and that's a huge oversight. And the obesity and mental health, it goes hand in hand. You go, which caused which? Like, poorly controlled, and they've looked at it. Poorly controlled diabetics have a huge proportion of depression, because your sugar's poorly controlled, right? It's not that you got depressed and go, screw it, I'm just gonna eat whatever I want now, but there's so much of that. And then when we, it's funny, because when Tro and I started talking about, Tro and I were discussing this, saying this is weird. We're seeing this in our patients. Why are we seeing this? We don't know why, but we're just raising the hypothesis that mental health was getting better. People were saying, I'm not as depressed, I'm not as stressed, I'm not as anxious. And if you're a stress eater and you feel less stressed, guess what? You stress eat less and you eat less of the garbage foods. So you're right. It's a cycle that when you're feeling better, you don't need those foods to enjoy life. You can go and enjoy playing tennis and not say, I have to drink a gallon of Gatorade to do this, right? And so it's amazing how people, and when we talked about that 6 years ago now, say it was either 6 or 7 years ago, and I got attacked by some guy named McAlpine, who's a pediatrician, saying, look, food has nothing to do with this. I'm like, you should have your license revoked for saying this. I'm like, now we go to the low carb conference there, the metabolic health conference, and we see a whole day of people like psychiatrists talking about how they're using diet to treat all these different addictions. And you go, wow, this is pretty amazing. Like where we've come in the last, but some of those guys are still going to stand that line, right? I don't know because we all blocked each other because we don't want to deal with each other. But the point is, like, they won't cross that line to say food has anything to do with it. And you go, well, I'm a clinician and I disagree. And I'm seeing patients. Are you? Ultimately.
I think that the same way, like med students these years are shocked to read and shocked to learn that it wasn't intuitive for early surgeons that you should wash your hands, and it was controversial. And Semmelweis basically killed himself trying to prove a point. And
But he made an
I mean,
observation. He goes, how come they're
yes,
dying over there and over here where they wash their hands, they're not
yes,
dying, right? Or they
yes,
didn't just
yes,
do
yes, yes.
autopsies.
So I mean, observations are the starting process of any scientific change. But the same way we are somewhat, like astonished when we read, oh, they were surprised to learn they had to wash their hands. I think that future med students will read with the same astonishment how these guys, how these guys were surprised to learn that food has tons to do with your mental health. One of the points I usually make is the brain is the most expensive tissue we know of, the human brain. And this has been measured, for example, how much energy consumes a human brain versus a brain of other higher mammals, higher hominids, higher apes. And our brain is by far the most expensive. So if you have a very, very expensive organ, doesn't it make sense that one of the first manifestations of a poor energy system, a poor energy delivery system, should be mental ones? I mean, sure, it will end up showing in your adipose tissue. Sure, it will end up showing, signs in your skeletal muscles. But if this is so energy dependent, it makes sense to me, or it makes it more intuitive to me, that some of the most frequent manifestations should be mental health ones. And I think that, yes, future medicine students will read how could these, or will think how these guys were so clueless about the relevance of metabolism in brain health, and
Well,
therefore
yeah.
emotional health.
And it all helped in diabetes management. How do they manage
Yeah.
diabetes? And when you go back to the old, and it's fun because I have the old textbooks and I look and go, what did these guys do before we got insulin? It was a ketogenic diet basically. They put them on a low carb. They go,
Yeah.
no, don't eat sugar because that's you're picking out sugar. But initially, like the reasoning was, well, if this didn't go so well, but they go, well, clearly these people are peeing out all their sugar and they're dying. So let's give them more sugar because they're losing
Yeah.
all their sugar. So let's give them more. Like that was made sense to them, and all these people died like right away, right? Because you throw in bunch. Now they say, we'll just throw sugar into the system and we'll just give you insulin. We don't need to worry about like what we're eating anymore. It's amazing how we've lost our sense of reasoning over time.
I think that we will always have wrong ideas. For example, I mean, to move away from nutrition examples, for example, critical care doctors, I was trained and tested on how many milliliters per kilogram per hour you needed to give a patient with sepsis, for example. And today, the less water we use, the better. But not too long ago, it was no, give them tons of fluids. And the consensus was flipped on its head. Very frequently, you end up seeing, oh, metformin only if you have normal creatinine. And now that's not the case. And
Well,
I
still
think
in
that,
at least in the States, in the hospital, if I have a a diabetic on metformin, when they get in the hospital, they go stop that drug, and then we'll put you on insulin. Like I don't know if they do that in
yes,
Mexico,
that's
but it's a standard of care. I'm like, why is
that
that the
used to be
standard?
frequent until not too long ago. And I guess the point I am trying to make is that I think it's healthy and wise to remind ourselves of how many times consensus has been wrong, to make it easier to correct. I'm sure we are still practicing with lots of mistakes. I mean, I don't think that mistakes for clinical practice end up with my generation. You know, I'm sure we will have to correct on our own tracks forever. However, it will be easier and faster if we are not attached to the consensus on how to treat things. I do believe that one of the most dangerous, quotes in general is we've always done it this way, and it's we should always be open to change the way we treat patients. I mean, not too long ago, because I am part of the staff and the professors of the Internal Medicine Residence Program. I oversee
Hey,
residents frequently.
and you're also a professor with that little college out there. What's that called?
You mean my university, or you mean?
Yeah, I'm joking. Harvard, right? You teach
Yeah.
the
Oh,
next
yeah.
season.
Oh, no. That's no.
So
I
that
mean
gives you a little bit of credibility.
yeah. But what I wanted to say is that um a month ago we we received a patient from the ER who whose first clinical history and first 4 years of treatment was assigned to me when I was a resident. So I was basically her doctor for 4 years, and I made her clinical history. And gosh, I mean, when I was reading what I was writing and what I was recommending 8 years ago, today I would have given totally different advice. Perhaps not totally different, but certainly very different advice to the same clinical problem to the same person. And I mean, of course, I did it within the best of my capacities, and of course, I did it within,
The standard of
with,
care.
yes, standard of care, with good intentions, thinking I was helping someone. And I still believe that what I was doing helped in some way. However, today I would have recommended something very different. This will happen all the time.
And
In
that's why we have to question the standard of care. And you go, look, I learned something. I'm changing what I'm doing. Look at my outcomes. And that's what gave Tro and I, like when we started Low Carb MD, is like, hey, we need to show there's a ton of doctors out there who are having positive benefits on their patients, doing something different, right? The sliding scale insulin, like take as many carbs and we'll give you more insulin at meal times. Like, well, why don't you just get rid of the carbs? Like, and to them, it's like a crazy idea of not giving them processed food. Like, that's too restrictive. Like, getting both your legs amputated is pretty restrictive, I think.
Oh, of course, of course. I mean, it's like this motivational. I saw it as a poster on working out early in the morning is hard, but having back pain for 3 decades is hard as well.
Yeah.
And passing on, skipping cake is hard, but living with diabetes is also hard. Choose your heart. I mean, you will have to deal with one form of hardship or another. Choose
One
your
is
heart.
temporary, one is permanent too, right? Like
Yes,
skipping
absolutely,
cake
absolutely,
today, right? That,
absolutely.
and that's the hard part, but that's the point. I think the point is what you're doing scientifically is so critical because you understand patients, you understand treating patients a lot different than being in a lab your entire life because there's these things where people know, like, that wasn't one of the things I addressed in my talk. It's like, it's like Paul in the Bible. It's like, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I know I'm doing evil. I should be doing good, but I get keep doing the bad stuff. And people, I know I shouldn't be eating cookies, but I can't help it. I'm right there. So how do we work on that? How do we help someone along? Right there's so much philosophy, psychology, physiology. When you understand the physiology, Tro and I've had this discussion. It's like, well, if someone knows, like, once you teach them right, like what the right path, whose responsibility? I'm like, really? I'd say at that point you have more responsibility, because you go, oh yeah, every time I drink the soda, I know what happens to my sugars because I have this continuous glucose monitor on, right? But if you're eating really bad food, you're like, take that CGM off because I'm going to the party and I don't want to see it. It's still happening whether
Yeah.
you see it or not. But it's the psychology, and some people control it just because they go, I know Brian's going to see it if I have that cookie and is going to go crazy. He's going to ask me what happened. Other people go, I just am competitive. I don't want to see that sugar go up myself. I want to be healthy as long as I can. So there's so much psychology in what we do, for sure. No question about it.
I think that modern clinicians are closer to, you could even say, shamans than what we realize. And I don't mean this in a spiritual way. I mean, I mean this in a like a social way. I mean, think of a shaman many years ago. They would be in one part therapists. They would be in one part, or therapists or counselors. They would be in one part providers of this substance may help you, or this routine may help you. They used to deal with substances. They also were in part teachers of people they were trying to help and future colleagues. They were, and there is lots of things in medicine that are still very ritualistic in that way, and one of the you could say philosophers of the history of medicine I like reading, Francis Pablo, has this tiny book on precisely how mental welfare, which now is, in most people's mind in this part of the world, uh, involve psychiatrists, still has very strong connections with how the village sorcerer used to help different people struggling with mental health. I mean, the modern healthcare is still close socially, and in some forms, in some ways, visually, to the way humans struggling with physical health problems or mental health problems where we're looking at not too long ago. One of the things that I think I think that keeping myself in contact with real world patients helps my research, and being involved in research helps my patients, because I think it's a good balance. This exposure allows me to scrutinize new study on whatever medical field to know if I need to change, my practice right now or not. And at the same time, seeing real world patients allows me to think, okay, is this study applicable in the context of the people I want to help? And I think both, I mean, having a foot in both fields is helpful. At the same time, and from a personal mental resilience point of view, because hospitals have lots of problems in general, paperwork, or paperwork mostly. It's just
Paperwork,
horrible, and
stress,
it's
overwork, too many
it's
patients, all that.
infuriating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I'm like, oh my gosh, when I am starting to feel burnt out of hospital problems, I now open my email and see reviewer number two's reply on a paper, and now I am angry at something else. So I think that also, I mean, I am not always angry at the same thing, and I have different problems to solve. That keeps me motivated, and that keeps me, in a weird way, away from the characteristic burnout you see in many clinicians and in many researchers.
Yeah, and I think when you see what the work, there's value in what you're doing. You know, there's like those studies where people are getting paid to dig holes and fill them back in, and dig hole and fill it back in. That's what doctors are doing now. After a while, they go, I don't care how much you pay me, I can't do this anymore. I'm not doing anything. And so there's jobs that are out there that, you know, people just are like sitting there doing nothing the whole time and getting paid, and it makes you crazy, because especially if you want to contribute, right?
Absolutely. I mean, one of, if you could say that all work fields are focused on solving one type of problem. All work fields involve solving some kind of problem. As a problem solver, it's motivating if what you're doing works, and it's frustrating if what you're doing does not work. So why am I not burnt out as a clinician? Well, because what I am doing works.
And you can evolve too. Like what you said 8 years ago, now you go, yeah, that wasn't. How many times I tell people, never skip breakfast, you're gonna die of starvation, your body's gonna go into stress mode, eat 6 times a day. I'm pushing the ADA's diet, I'm watching my patients get sicker. I'm like, they're not, none of these people are listening to me, but they were listening. It was just the wrong advice.
Yeah. I mean, not too long ago, at a conference a few months ago, we were having a discussion on I was talking to Mariela Galant. Do you know Mariela? She's fantastic. She lives part of her time in Madrid, part of her time in Israel, and part of her time in the United States. And she's really, really good. But anyway, she was telling us about a patient, and Dorian Greeno was also in that conversation. And she was telling a patient story, and to make it brief and to arrive quicker to the point, she said, well, this was her context, and she started restricting carbs and reverting her diabetes, yada yada, and continued. And Dorian stopped the conversation there and said, do you realize this is perhaps the only group where you could say reverse diabetes, yada yada, and then continue? Like, it's people in this bubble are used to stories of reverse diabetes, reversed autoimmune disease, improved mental health hugely. I mean, do you know how many ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease remission cases I saw in a tertiary reference center during a decade? None. I didn't see a single one. I mean, for a decade, and we are a reference center, and we have one of the, if not the largest inflammatory bowel disease clinic in Latin America. I hadn't seen one case. And now I am used to them, So I think that's one of the reasons why humans keep doing anything is if it works. And that definitely helps at a personal level.
Yeah, and once we see it's possible, right? Like for me, how many years? I was in practice 17 years before I saw anyone come off insulin. And I heard these chiropractors saying, we get you off insulin. I go, that's dangerous. They're going to kill people. And then I had 11 people come off in 6 months by changing lifestyle. And you go, okay, now I believe this. Like, I've never seen this before. And I couldn't even believe it. I'm seeing it. And I can't believe it.
Yes.
And you go, man, what are we doing? Right? Like Jason Fung and all these guys who said, Brian, look, here's how it works. So the physiology, I go, yeah, we understand physiology, right? Like, how do we not understand that? Like, you can't say you take insulin, it makes the sugar just disappear. People believe that, but what's it doing? Shoving into your tissues where you have renal failure and blindness and amputations and wounds. And you go, wow, why don't we change what we're doing? And they go, that guy's a quack. Don't listen to him. Like, but I came off my insulin and I feel better. And I'm like 20 years younger. What happened? Like, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yes, absolutely. I didn't see a single diabetes remission case in all my med school clinical rotations and 4 years of internal medicine residency. And now I am, very much used to see diabetes remission cases in my private practice or in case series. So it's
Where's the curiosity of your colleagues? Where's the curiosity go, what the heck do you do with this patient? How do you get them off insulin? Like, don't you think as a doctor, you go, I'm all ears. If I can get my patient better, do you think I'm not going to do that?
I think that most clinicians are curious, but however, I tend to think the best out of everyone until proving heavily in another direction. But I think that most of them, the way I used to do it a while ago, think they are helping people. They are making their best. They have good intentions. They want to provide the best available knowledge they have, but they are very frequently working in a system so strained that throws 20 patients at them and demands to see them in 4 hours, that they don't have the mental space to question what they are doing.
Yeah, the system beats you down. I think that's it. They don't question. They go, "This is what I learned. I'm just
Yeah.
sticking with this the rest of my life career,
Yes.
and then I'll retire, and then I'll go,
Yes.
then I'll go,
Yes. And
sit
I
on a
have
farm."
15 minutes. I have 15 minutes for a patient. I have this algorithmic thinking of what should I do?
Yeah, we'll let someone else do that.
Who's
I'm not
next?
dealing with it. They can go to the
Yeah.
endocrinologist, and that's
Yeah.
just funny because over the last few years, especially, I've had people say to me like, "You and Tro think you know more than the ADA and the FDA and this and this." I'm like, actually, we do. I think based on what we're
Yes.
doing,
That I mean,
it's
it shouldn't
working.
be. It should. Of course, absolutely.
And you go, it's working. I'm not gonna like. You could say it's not working, but I have the clinical data, I have the patients, and I think that's the thing is we had to protect ourselves by practicing a little different medicine because if it's just me and Tro doing it, then obviously you're the super targets. Like, and for what you and really the respect to you because I'm hesitant to say anything about my knowledge of LDL cholesterol and the lean mass hyperresponder model just because it puts a target on you and you guys are actually doing the research. So maybe you could just give us a little background on I could just tell people, it's always been said, the higher your LDL, the more likely you're gonna have a heart attack. And then you start looking at the data, you go, does it say that? Does it say that in my 23-year-old with an LDL of 200 or 180? What does it mean? Do I have to look at other markers? And so it seems like medicine has been so hyper focused on what's the LDL cholesterol. Like, let's not look at all the other stuff. Let's just look at that one marker. And you guys are coming along saying, there's more to the story.
Sure. I mean, and to be entirely honest, I wasn't sure. If you had asked me why I think LDL goes up when people go on a ketogenic diet, which is something I had already observed, let's say in 2015, I would say it is reasonable to think that it is saturated fat intake. And I was already, in a human metabolism Ph.D. And I thought, yeah, I mean, that would make sense. Maybe it's saturated fat intake, what's bringing LDL up. And again, I had to change my mind. When the first time I heard Dave Feldman express his points, his early points, I was like, okay, I mean, let's test this. I am lean. I know how to restrict carbs. I have access to measuring my lipids. I'm going to test this. And I mean, I think that not only seeing is believing. Questioning and being able to replicate an observation is where scientific change starts. So I think that I wasn't expecting, not even 3 years ago, that the contribution of saturated fat intake was going to be so small. I wasn't expecting, I genuinely didn't know if LDL's concentration was going to be strongly linked or not with plaque burden or any other marker. I mean, those were genuine open questions, and I think that it's at the same time exciting because this shows how much we still have to learn about lipid physiology. And how much, because lipid physiology was developed in the 20th century at a point where most people were eating already a low-fat diet, and we're starting to develop lots and lots and lots of insulin resistance, we don't know much about lipid physiology in a context that was not rare before food industrialization. I mean, people, as you were mentioning a while ago, people were restricting carbs or going on a ketogenic diet without knowing they were doing it. And they were, I mean, most people were lean back then. Most people were eating real foods back then. So they were fairly carb restricted. And, you know, we simply didn't get to study lipid physiology in that context. And that's what we are, trying to do again. I think that the again, we should be able to, keep an open mind and say, yeah, it turns out LDL by itself is not a good cardiovascular marker. Turns out that saturated fat intake, it does not explain why LDL goes up. Turns out, as it very frequently occurs, this is context dependent. And the context of insulin sensitive restricting carbs was rare until not so long ago.
Yeah, and for me as a clinician, I look at it too. I go, okay, if you have a high LDL, like people say, I have a high LDL, yeah, your insulin A1C's through the roof, your triglycerides are through the roof. You're a disaster waiting to happen. Like you're a different case than my guy who's a triathlete. These lean mass hyperresponders. I look and go, okay,
Absolutely.
let's look at all the other
Absolutely.
markers and what are the markers. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, I just had this conversation with a friend yesterday. We go through all this stuff, and he goes, yeah, yeah, okay, but how do I lower my LDL? I'm like, eat more carbs if you want to. If you want your LDL to be, does that make you healthier? I don't think so. But I think there's so much, but to question the paradigm, to question like all of the last 50 years at least, people said, look, it's the LDL cholesterol, it's the LDL, it's a cholesterol, it's going to kill you.
Look,
Like.
I think that also, I mean, ever heard of the Tao Manifesto? I'll tell you very, very, I mean, if you Google Tao, TAU Manifesto,
Oh, tau, yeah.
one of the debates, in among mathematicians is if pi is wrong. Not that it is incorrect, but a wrong concept. And some mathematicians think that there are better alternatives. I remember my dad saying, it is very, very likely that whatever scientific opinion you have is not as old or as solid as pi. And if someone can come up with a set of solid arguments on why we should change it, I mean, if pi, the concept of pi, is shaky and can and stumbles, no scientific concept is safe. I mean, never think that it is very likely that the lipid hypothesis, is not as solid as what circumference to radio ratio we should use. And if that's true for something as basic as pi, don't trust too much any
Yeah,
scientific
because we're all taught
concept.
that. You taught this is true, and everyone believes it's true, right?
Yeah,
That's what makes science so. And the thing is, even with the lean mass hyperresponder model, the energy model, and I haven't seen an exception in my practice, but your job as a scientist is to prove it wrong. So if you say vegan diet's the best or carnivore diet's the best or this diet's the best, you look and go, okay, let me see an exception to that rule. Go, look, for this person, it's not. I've seen people that they didn't do well on a low carb ketogenic diet. Why? They're stressed, tense, hate the world, not sleeping. There's other factors. It's not just what you're eating. It's not the Mediterranean diet necessarily. It's a Mediterranean lifestyle. If you can wake up and go, I'm just playing tennis today. I'm gonna enjoy my day. I'm going to do stuff. Like so many of us, especially doctors, like we don't get that the element of peace and relaxation and being able to say, I'm turning my brain off for a little while. I'm gonna read some dumb book that has nothing to do with my calling in life.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
So do you have any looking at the lean mass hyperresponder model, do you have anything in the back of your mind you go, I wonder if we're right on this or whether there's gonna because uh I think in the long run we go our obligation is to patients and you want them to be
For
as healthy
sure.
and safe as possible, right? Not
The,
your ego involved, right?
Clinical medicine is not about being scientifically right. Clinical medicine is about helping the patient in front of you.
And moving
So,
the science
uh,
forward.
absolutely, absolutely. So I think that yes, for example, and this is something I have discussed openly with Dave. I think the cutoff values of the lipids triad need to be revisited. I think that we should have a different working definition. I mean, for now, and because the studies are already going, I mean, you need to stick with a operational definition the way it was. But I think I strongly think that the cutoff lipid values should be changed at some point.
You mean higher or
I
lower?
think lower. I think they should
Okay.
be lower. But let me rephrase that. I think we should test which are the clinically relevant lipid cutoffs. I also think that there will be a different spectrum of risk among LMHRs, because it's not the same to be an LMHR after a heart attack than being Nick Norwitz. And Nick is young, has lots of cardiac imaging, has his genome sequenced, has like it's we should expect that LMHRs, some LMHRs will have increased heart risk, well, cardiovascular risk, and some of them could benefit definitely of lowering circulating LDL particles or ApoB particles. I think this is true. So I think that in general, the scientific statement, yes, it's not as straightforward as high LDL is always bad, as we used to think, but I do expect a spectrum of risk profiles among LMHRs.
Yeah, because there's so much genetic variability. What training are you doing?
Yeah,
What's your stress
yeah.
level like?
Or how
Yeah.
effective. I mean, if you are after going low carb, let's say your inflammation improves, but it's not entirely away. Well, this small inflammation could still have a poor interacting effect with high circulating lipids. So we'll see. We're learning, but yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Or if you're doing hit training 4 hours a day and you're doing crazy stuff, like,
Yeah,
so it's going to be a spectrum, I think, too. And I think it's good to say, okay,
absolutely.
let's keep an open mind and let's look in your case based on the data. Here's the recommend, but we had no recommendations before. Now we at least will have something where we can, yeah, I got to go too. Yeah, some of those things where we need to, just really keep the our brains right and really just look at the science. So I have to ask you, I know we got to head out because we got patients to take care of. What's life's best medicine for you? Like, where do you go when life's tough, when things are getting rough, or someone doesn't like your study? What keeps you going? What motivates you?
I honestly think that I'm a stereotypical nerd in many ways, but this quote from Gandalf in The Hobbit on "It is the routinely deeds of small folk what keeps evil at bay." I think that's mostly true. I think that small acts of kindness with your, loved ones, with people around you, with your neighbors, small acts of healthy routines, and those hobbit-like, the accumulation of small hobbit-like deeds and routines and moments is really life's best medicine. I mean, it's quality time with your loved ones. It is quality routines, good sleep, good food, good company. It's what keeps physical and mental illnesses away.
Huge things for people around you too. It helps their illness, not dealing
Sure,
with the jerk all the time.
absolutely, absolutely.
So, how do people track you down if they want to find you?
Well, X is perhaps the X Twitter, the easiest. It's just Adrian Soto-Mota, and yeah, that's it.
Or you go to PubMed, look at
Yeah,
all this stuff.
Adrian.
Look at
Adrian
all your
Soto-Mota.
studies and all the stuff you're doing. So we'll get you back and we'll talk about all this stuff. But I knew this hour was going to fly by fast because you have so much to offer. But
Yeah.
I wanted
Oh,
people to have a flavor of who you are because they're going to see your name a lot on a lot of these big studies coming out. But get back to serving patients, man. Thank you so much for joining me.
likewise. Thank
And everyone,
you.
everyone listen. This is one of the best scientists, best doctors out there. He's doing great work.
That's very kind.
And be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Take that advice, and
Absolutely.
keep an open mind. I think that's the important thing. Keep an open mind that, like, I believe this my entire life. What are the exceptions? And defend what you believe, and be willing to listen. Just be quiet and go, what's your point? Let me see if I can pick this up, because I think these guys are going to change medicine. I have a really good feeling based on what I'm seeing clinically. So thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Adrian, thank you so
very
much. Have a great weekend. Thanks for joining me early in the morning. I
Likewise.
appreciate it. All right, take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.